Having learned that her husband was denied a bonus, the woman went to his boss to sort things out. But she wasn't ready for the reception she got. A romantic TV series was playing, but Eva, lost in thought, wasn't following the plot. She was clearing the dinner table, contemplating how to reorganize their family budget. Eva liked to plan everything in advance, whether at work or at home. Her superiors appreciated this about her. Even in her relatively modest role as a data entry operator, she was always prepared with quick answers to any question. However, things didn't always run as smoothly at home. Most of the household responsibilities for creating comfort and order fell on her shoulders. When she asked her husband for help or to spend time with their daughter, he would grumble. "Can't I even relax at home? I work my tail off to make sure you don't need anything, and now you're pestering me with chores." Stephen had once earned a good salary, but recently he'd been bringing home less and less money. Whenever Eva asked about it, he'd brush her off, citing vague work problems. That evening, during dinner, Eva asked, "Stephen, when will you get your bonus? I was at the parent-teacher meeting yesterday. We need to contribute to the class fund. Plus, it's getting colder, and Rosa doesn't have boots or a jacket. Didn't we just buy that stuff last year?" Stephen replied irritably, without looking up from his plate. As if apologizing, Eva softly responded, "Well, not last year, 2 years ago. Rosa's growing, Stephen. She's outgrown those clothes. We need to buy bigger ones." Stephen threw his fork down and suddenly snapped. "What do you expect me to do when the boss just decided to cancel our bonuses? I'm shocked myself. Day and night, I work my fingers to the bone, and this is how he thanks us, deciding to save money at our expense." Eva sat down next to him, gently stroking his hand, trying to calm him. "Just like that, he canceled it? Was there a reason?" "He doesn't need a reason," Stephen grumbled, standing up. "That's it, my head's killing me. I'm going to bed." The mother-in-law, who had come over that day, saw how upset Eva was and stepped into the hallway. A few minutes later, she returned, holding out some cash. "Here, it's not much, but it should be enough for Rosa's boots. Tomorrow I can withdraw a bit more from my savings. I've been setting some aside for a rainy day." Eva pushed her hand away indignantly and said, "No, thank you. I'll go to Stephen's workplace tomorrow myself. Just don't tell him. Why should that tyrant of a boss decide whether or not people get their hard-earned money? Let him explain to me on what grounds he denied Stephen his bonus." Jean gasped, clasping her hands to her chest, and whispered, "Maybe it's better not to interfere in Stephen's matters. He won't like it. Let him handle it himself." But Eva was resolute. She had already budgeted that money and planned to shop for Rosa's new clothes in just a couple of days. Her next paycheck wasn't due for a while, and the cold outside was intensifying. The entire evening, she rehearsed the conversation she intended to have with Stephen's boss. By morning, she felt fully prepared for what she expected to be an unpleasant confrontation. However, from the very start, nothing went as planned. Eva had pictured Stephen's boss as tall, well-groomed, and smirking arrogantly. But when she walked into his office, she froze in place. Sitting before her in a wheelchair was a thin man with an open and kind expression. Her carefully prepared speech vanished from her mind, and she fumbled to explain why she had come. He listened silently to the very end, gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly that Eva noticed his knuckles turn white. Speaking as calmly as he could, the boss said, "First of all, I didn't cancel anyone's bonus. And as for your husband, I fired him. Without severance pay, I'm afraid. What he did warranted being shown the door long ago." Eva stood there, completely bewildered. Then, as if snapping out of it, she asked, "May I know what exactly he did?" "I'd rather not discuss it," the man replied softly, wheeling himself toward the window. "Ask your husband. Maybe he'll be willing to tell you himself." Realizing that continuing the conversation was pointless, Eva left the office in silence. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she couldn't stop them. All her carefully crafted plans for the near future had crumbled in an instant. Unknowingly, Eva let out a small sob, which was immediately met by a woman's voice. "Are you all right? Would you like some water? By the way, my name's Wilma. Have a seat." Eva turned to see a young secretary looking at her with concern. Taking a seat, she accepted the glass of water from Wilma's hands. Then, to Eva's surprise, Wilma began speaking in a whisper. "Forgive me, I overheard your conversation. Your husband deserved it. Do you know what a good man Howard is? He's never unfair to anyone. Life has just been so cruel to him lately. Not long ago, he was on his feet, and the company was thriving. Now, it's on the brink of bankruptcy." Wiping her tears, Eva looked at the secretary in shock. "What happened to your boss? And what does my Stephen have to do with it?" Wilma's expression turned sharp, as if blaming Eva for something, and she began explaining. "Howard was in a terrible car accident recently. He spent over a month in the hospital, and everyone thought he wouldn't survive. While he was fighting for his life, his wife and your husband got close. They didn't even try to hide it from the staff." Wilma paused, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. Lowering her voice even further, she continued. "She told us that while Howard was clinging to life in the hospital, your Stephen would visit his wife like clockwork. And while you're listening to this, you should also know that in just a little over a month, Howard's wife managed to destroy everything he worked so hard to build. Money was drained from all the accounts or transferred elsewhere. Employee salaries are overdue. The company is on the verge of collapse. And, as you can imagine, your husband played a role in all of this." Eva sat there, stunned, unable to believe that Stephen could betray her and their daughter so cruelly. At that moment, a red-haired woman peeked into the office and, greeting Wilma, asked, "Coming to have tea with us? We're waiting." Wilma got up, excused herself, and stepped out. A minute later, she returned and resumed. "Imagine how Howard must feel now," Wilma continued. "Not only is he confined to a wheelchair, but his wife cheated on him, and his company is falling apart." Eva felt on the verge of tears. It all added up. While she meticulously planned every penny of their family budget, her husband was off enjoying himself, lying to her about troubles at work. She rose silently from the chair and headed for the exit. But as soon as she opened the door, she was met by a crowd of employees gathered in the hallway. A burly man, nearly 2 meters tall, wearing jeans and a black t-shirt with his arms crossed over his chest, spoke first. "Well, isn't this convenient? At least one of you finally showed up, since your husband is trying to hide. So tell us, when are we going to get our hard-earned money? Or have you and your darling husband already bought a villa in the Canary Islands with our salaries?" "Exactly," chimed in a woman in her 50s. "My grandson's birthday is coming up. I'm running out of medicine. How am I supposed to pay for anything when I haven't been paid in 2 months?" Eva shrank back against the wall, realizing that Wilma must have told the red-haired girl who she was. Trying to defend herself, Eva stammered quietly. "I'm sorry, but what does this have to do with me? I came here to find out why my husband didn't get his bonus." A tall blonde with long legs and a plunging neckline smirked bitterly and said with a sneer, "Yeah, right. Tell us another one. Husband and wife, they're 2 peas in a pod. I bet you've already cooked up plans for all our money." Realizing that no one would listen to her explanations, Eva turned abruptly and headed for the exit. Behind her, curses and insults flew like stones. If she'd had the strength, she might have run just to escape the humiliation faster. She had no memory of how she got home. But the moment she opened the door, she knew something was wrong. From the living room came the sound of her mother-in-law sobbing. Through the tears, Eva could make out her words. "My son, how could you? Where will you go? You have a family, a wife, a daughter. Please, for my sake, come to your senses." Abruptly throwing open the door to the room, Eva saw her husband hastily stuffing his belongings into a suitcase without even folding them. Glancing at her, he snarled, What the hell were you thinking, going there? Did you find out everything? Well, congratulations. You've only made things worse for yourself. You could have just kept living in blissful ignorance. Eva was overwhelmed with anger and hurt. For a moment, his words left her breathless. Then, stepping closer, she said quietly, "Now this is my fault too? You had a mistress. You've done God knows what with those people's money. I had to listen to all their accusations at the office, and now I'm to blame." Her mother-in-law, trying to calm them down, stepped between them and pleaded, "Are you two out of your minds? Eva, this happens. Every man slips up at least once. Forgive him, the fool. You have a daughter, what are you doing to her?" But Stephen barked at her harshly. "Mom, will you shut up? What nonsense are you spouting? Stay out of this. We don't need you meddling." Turning back to Eva, he stepped closer, looked her straight in the eyes, and hissed, "Don't expect a penny in alimony. And I'll make sure you lose custody of Rosa. Just watch, I'll take her from you. So don't get comfortable." His mother, wiping away tears, gathered herself and left silently. Stephen grabbed his suitcase and stormed out, slamming the door so hard it shook the apartment. Eva was left alone in the deafening silence, afraid to move. It felt as if the slamming door had shattered her entire world, her carefully built family life, everything she had worked for all these years. Her heart alternated between stopping and pounding wildly. She sat there, gasping for air, as though she might suffocate at any moment. How long she sat like that, Eva couldn't say. But it was clear that at least 3 hours had passed when she heard the soft scraping of a key in the door lock. Only then did she remember that Rosa should have already come home from school. Quickly locking herself in the bathroom, Eva tried to steady her voice and called out, "Sweetheart, take off your coat. I'll be right out, and we'll have lunch. Is Dad still not home? When will he be back? I want to show him my drawing." Rosa's cheerful voice rang out. Eva pretended not to hear the question. Taking a bottle of sedatives from the cabinet, pills she occasionally used to fall asleep on restless nights, she measured out a dose and took it. A few minutes later, she joined her daughter in the living room. Forcing herself to appear calm, she smiled and said, "All right, my darling, you'll have to show your drawing to me for now. Daddy has gone on a business trip. But first, wash your hands and let's eat." She still had no idea how she would eventually explain everything to Rosa, but decided to hold off on telling her anything for now. That evening, Eva struggled to fall asleep, and when she finally did, she had a nightmare. In it, she was running, chased by people reaching out to her, shouting, "Give us back our money! Return the money!" Jolting awake, she glanced at the clock. It was 4 a.m. There were still 2 hours until she had to get up, but she knew she wouldn't be able to fall back asleep. That morning, Eva made a decision. She wasn't going to wait for Stephen to file for divorce. She would do it herself. The days that followed passed in a blur. She went to work, helped Rosa with her homework, cleaned, and cooked, but it all felt mechanical, like she was watching herself from the outside. Inside, she felt hollow. Eva had no idea what awaited her after the divorce or how she would manage with her daughter on her own. A couple of days after Stephen's departure, Eva's mother-in-law, Jean, showed up. She cried, begging Eva to reconsider, but Eva was resolute. "I don't even want to hear about that scoundrel, sorry. I've already filed for divorce, now I'm just waiting for the court date." Seeing Jean's pained expression, Eva added sympathetically, "But don't worry, you can visit us anytime, just like before. I know how much you love Rosa." Weeks passed. One morning, as Eva went to wake her daughter for school, she realized Rosa had a fever. Calling out of work wasn't an option, her coworker was on vacation, and there was no one to cover for her. Panicking, Eva called Jean, her voice trembling with urgency. "Jean, could you please come and stay with Rosa? She has a fever, and I absolutely have to go to work." Jean immediately replied, her voice full of concern. Of course, Eva, of course. I'll come right away. And I'll stay with Rosa as long as you need. If it helps, I can even move in for a while. Don't worry about me being a bother. At that moment, Eva felt she had no other choice. Besides, she had long believed that Jean wasn't responsible for her son's actions. Jean moved in with them, which proved to be a great help for Eva. She could go to work knowing that Rosa was in good hands with her grandmother. Rosa spent nearly a week bedridden with a relentless cough, and Jean cared for her diligently. Finally, one day, Jean called Eva at work, her voice filled with relief. Eva, Rosa is feeling better. She even managed to eat some chicken soup. She hasn't eaten properly in days. Maybe you could stop by the store after work and pick up some meat? I'll make her favorite meatball hedgehogs. Promising to buy everything needed, Eva planned a trip to the supermarket after work. As she walked up the steps to the store, she caught a glimpse of a man in a wheelchair sitting off to the side with his hand outstretched. His face seemed oddly familiar. While shopping, Eva racked her brain trying to remember who he reminded her of. Then it hit her. After paying at the checkout, she hurried outside, worried the man might be gone, but he was still there in the same spot. Howard, she asked softly, almost afraid to scare him off. The man before her bore little resemblance to the businessman she remembered, the one who used to run a company with an entire team of employees. Now, he sat unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes and a lifeless gaze, begging for spare change. For a moment, he simply stared at Eva. Then, with a bitter smile, he said, "Ah, it's you. Well, as you can see, this is what I've come to. I need something to live on, after all. I've got nothing left now. Not a thing. No family, no home, no job, no health." He pulled a small metal flask from inside his jacket, unscrewed the cap, and added, "Cheers. Gotta stay warm. Want some?" Eva quickly shook her head as he took a few greedy gulps before tucking the flask away. Without even realizing what she was doing, Eva hooked her grocery bag onto the wheelchair's handle and, turning the wheels toward her home, said firmly, "All right. Here's what's going to happen. You're coming with me. You'll clean up, eat, rest, and then we'll figure out what to do with you." The man tried to resist, but Eva ignored his protests and continued pushing the wheelchair toward her home. Fortunately, her building had a ramp at the entrance, allowing her to roll the wheelchair inside easily. For the first time, she was genuinely glad her apartment was on the ground floor. When Eva opened the door, Jean stepped into the hallway. Throwing up her hands, she exclaimed, "Oh my goodness, where did you find this poor man? Eva, who is he? You're still married to Stephen. How can you bring another man into the house?" Eva cut her off sharply. "Jean, it's not what you think. He's just someone I know who needs help." It was clear that Jean was unhappy with the situation, but she said nothing further and retreated to the kitchen. Luckily, when Stephen had left, he hadn't taken all his belongings. Eva found a clean t-shirt, a tracksuit, and a disposable razor. Handing them to Howard, she said, "Let me help you move onto the stool in the bathroom. At least there, you can clean up a bit." But Howard shook his head, embarrassed. No, that's not necessary. I can still manage to take care of myself, even if it's tough. It's just, lately, the depression's been getting the better of me. It makes you lose the will to do anything." True to his word, he pulled himself up with his arms and skillfully transferred from the wheelchair to the stool in the bathroom. Eva carefully closed the door, and for about 15 minutes, she heard the sound of running water. When the door finally opened, she saw an entirely different person. Clean-shaven, with damp hair, Howard looked years younger. Even his eyes no longer seemed so lifeless. "Well, now that's much better," Eva said with a warm smile, gesturing toward the table. During dinner, Jean didn't say a single word, though her disapproving glances at Howard spoke volumes. She clearly didn't approve, but seemed unwilling to voice her objections outright. "Rosa, are you finished? Come on, time for bed." Say goodnight to Mommy, Jean said, giving Eva an admonishing look as she took Rosa to tuck her in. Left alone with Howard, Eva found herself talking with him well into the night. Their conversation wandered through various topics, and she realized how easy it was to talk to this former boss. Yet, Howard's mood shifted unpredictably. One moment, he would smile while reminiscing about his past, and the next, he would fall silent, staring off into the distance. Eva sensed his deep sadness but wasn't sure how to help. Pouring him a cup of tea, she gently said. Howard, let's make a deal, Eva said. You can stay here for a while. Think of it as a chance to recover emotionally. Don't worry about anything, just rest. I can't promise gourmet meals, but we'll definitely manage a bowl of soup for lunch and some porridge for breakfast. The man placed his hand gently over hers, looking her straight in the eye as he asked, Why are you doing this? You see what I am now, just a plain homeless man. And your mother-in-law doesn't seem too thrilled about me being here either. Eva carefully withdrew her hand, took a sip of tea, and replied, I don't have an answer. But for some reason, I feel like I have to help you. As for my mother-in-law, I've already filed for divorce. It's just a matter of time. She doesn't live with us, she's only helping out because my daughter was sick. Standing up from the table, Eva added, I'll set up a bed for you in the living room. It'll be easy for you to move around with the wheelchair, and if you need anything during the night, just call out, I'm a light sleeper. That night, Eva once again found herself unable to sleep. She lay awake, trying to analyze her decision. She couldn't even explain to herself why she had brought Howard into her home, but deep down, it felt like the right thing to do. The guest made no sound throughout the night. At one point, Eva became so concerned that she quietly opened the door to check on him. He hadn't moved an inch. It seemed that after finally reaching a proper bed, Howard had fallen asleep in one position and stayed that way the entire night. The next morning, when Eva came out of her room to get ready for work, she found Howard already sitting in his wheelchair by the window, gazing into the distance. Hearing her footsteps, he turned and said, Good morning. Thank you so much. I can't remember the last time I slept so peacefully. But don't worry, I'll leave now. I don't want to be a burden. Eva immediately gave him a stern look. Let's agree on something. I can't force you to stay, you're an adult, free to go wherever you want. But I ask you to stay for at least a week. Take this time to rest and prepare yourself to start fresh. And since my husband's actions seem to have contributed to your situation, I'll try to help you in any way I can. Howard opened his mouth to say something, but Eva cut him off. Judging by the fact that you ran your own business, you're clearly a smart person. It would be great if, while you're here, you could help Rosa with her schoolwork. She could use a tutor. It was clear that Howard felt very uncomfortable, but he eventually agreed. That morning, just as Eva was about to leave for work, he wheeled himself into the hallway and said, Can I make something or go to the store for you? Don't think I'm asking out of obligation, I do have a little money. But Eva, in a tone that left no room for disagreement, replied, The fridge already has soup and mashed potatoes with cutlets. I'll go to the store myself to get anything else we need. You just rest, watch some TV, and finally get some sleep. Howard extended his hand, offering a few bills. Here, take this. It's not much, but I'll be getting more soon. I get disability benefits every month, so don't turn me away. Eva understood that if she didn't take the money, she might hurt his feelings. So, she accepted it with a smile. As she stepped outside, she noticed her mother-in-law, Jean, with Rosa. Looking at her granddaughter, Jean said, Rosa, go ahead, we'll catch up with you in a minute. I need to talk to your mom. Once Rosa walked a few steps ahead, Jean began speaking disapprovingly. You know, I'm not going to live under the same roof with some homeless man. I can't even imagine how you'll leave your granddaughter alone with a complete stranger. How can you judge him without even knowing him? Eva responded indignantly, quickly adding, He's a smart, decent person, he just fell on hard times. You should be thinking about your son. He hasn't even bothered to ask how his daughter is doing. Jean stopped walking. I'm going to take Rosa to school. She's feeling better now, but now you have your smart and decent man. Looks like I'm no longer needed. You deal with it yourself. But I'll tell you honestly, I feel sorry for you, you fool. Eva didn't respond and simply walked silently to the bus stop. That evening, Jean didn't come. But when Eva entered the apartment, she heard Howard calmly explaining something to her daughter. In the room, it was a picture of peace. Rosa was sitting at the desk, writing in her notebook, while their guest, with a textbook in hand, was dictating to her. Upon hearing Eva's footsteps, they both turned around. Rosa, happily running to her mom, almost shouted. "Mom, you wouldn't believe it," Howard explained the math problem so well, way better than the teacher or grandma. "I understood everything right away and solved it," Rosa said excitedly. Eva kissed her daughter and softly replied, "Well, first of all, it's Mr. Howard, not just Howard. And secondly, have you eaten?" "Yes, we had lunch. The soup was really delicious," their guest said with a smile. Winking at Rosa, he added, "And I asked her to call me Howard because friends don't call each other uncle or aunt. We're friends now, right, Rosa?" Rosa nodded eagerly and, looking at her mom, pleaded, "Mom, can we make potato pancakes for dinner today? I told Howard how delicious you make them." That evening, they joked and cooked dinner together, then enjoyed the meal. Eva suddenly realized that from the outside, they would look like a real, loving family. Howard, almost as if sensing her thoughts, quietly said, "It feels so good being with you, as if we've known each other for 100 years. From that moment on, their relationship seemed to shift to a more friendly and warm dynamic. Eva couldn't explain why, but from the very first moment, she completely trusted this man. She handed him the apartment key without a second thought, not worried that he might steal anything, though, frankly, there wasn't much of value. When Rosa returned from school, Howard would feed her lunch, and together, they would go over her lessons. Eva never once considered that he might hurt her daughter. She started thinking about how she could help Howard. She looked into ways to get him back on his feet and made plans. But one day, when she came home earlier than usual, she was shocked by what she found. Rosa was at additional lessons, and Jean was supposed to pick her up. Since Howard arrived, Jean had refused to come to the house, but, missing her granddaughter terribly, she occasionally picked Rosa up from school and brought her to the entrance. Upon entering the apartment, Eva immediately felt that something was off. The TV was blaring loudly in the room, and, to her surprise, Howard didn't roll over to greet her as he usually did when she came home. Thinking he might have fallen asleep, Eva went into the room, but Howard wasn't there. She went to the kitchen and was met with a horrifying sight. On the table stood an empty bottle of brandy, which had been in her bar for who knows how long, and right in the middle of the crumbs from bread, Howard lay face down, his face pressed into the mess. Eva immediately realized he must have found the bottle and drank it all, falling asleep afterward. She was relieved that her daughter wasn't there to witness this. "Howard, are you out of your mind?" she scolded, shaking him, but he just muttered something incoherent in a semi-conscious state. She struggled to roll his wheelchair toward the bed and tried to move him onto it, but in his current state, he felt like a heavy sack. Muttering to herself, Eva covered him with a blanket and began clearing the table. Inside her, two feelings were fighting. On one hand, she scolded him for his behavior, but on the other, she felt sorry for him. She knew how hard it must be for him, given the life he had lived. That day, Eva didn't visit Howard in his room, and after dinner with her daughter, she went to bed. It took her a while to fall asleep. She kept thinking about what had happened and decided that she would definitely talk to him the next day about his drinking. She knew something had to be done about it. The next morning, when Eva entered the kitchen, she saw that Howard was already there. He looked up at her with a confused expression and quietly said, "Sorry, if you can forgive me. I don't even know how this happened. It felt like this overwhelming wave of resentment and despair hit me. Life is over, you know? I can't live like a vegetable." I'm used to making plans, working, managing. Now I can't do any of that. Eva looked at him and tried to sound as firm as possible. You can't just fall apart like this. You have your arms, your legs. We'll come up with something, I promise. You'll see. Trust me, being disabled is not an excuse to drink yourself into oblivion. You need to fight instead, she said, her tone strict. She wanted to pity Howard, to hug him, but she knew very well that pity wasn't the best approach. So, she added firmly, if you don't pull yourself together, no one will do it for you. Let's agree that this will never happen again, and we'll forget about yesterday. Howard nodded, but Eva could see that his despondency hadn't lifted. As she was leaving for work, she smiled and playfully wagged her finger at him. Make sure you behave yourself. I hope we've agreed on everything. I'll try to come back early today. If I can, we'll all go for a walk in the park for an hour. Howard attempted a smile in return, but Eva felt a pang in her chest at the sight of it. His eyes were filled with so much sadness that, for a moment, she felt afraid to leave him alone. Shaking off the negative thoughts, she left for work, but throughout the day, she was on edge, constantly checking the time. As soon as she had the chance, Eva asked her boss for time off and went straight home without stopping anywhere. Turning onto her street, she saw a crowd of people gathered in the middle of the road. Her heart sank, and she quickened her pace, heading toward them. As she got closer, she saw an elderly driver angrily scolding Howard, who was sitting in his wheelchair. All right, you don't value your life, but what about me? What about my passengers? Do you want to die or something? Why are you throwing yourself under my wheels? I almost didn't manage to stop. I had the green light. Howard was sitting, holding his head in his hands, silently listening to the driver's shouts. Eva grabbed the wheelchair and quickly turned it toward home, apologizing. Sorry, I think something might have been wrong with the mechanism. He's not the type to just throw himself in front of a car. Right, Howard? She looked at him, and he averted his gaze. The driver continued to shout angrily at them from behind, but Eva didn't hear him anymore, quickly steering the wheelchair toward the entrance. Once inside the apartment, she collapsed weakly into a chair in the hallway. That's it. This can't go on any longer, she said, her voice firm. You need psychological help, or you'll either end up under a car or drunk. Tomorrow, no, today, I'll find out where we can get help. We're going to get you treatment. Howard tried to protest, saying he didn't need anything, that he was tired of everything, but Eva cut him off sharply. I don't want to hear it. You're a young, healthy guy. This depression is going to bury you if you don't take control. Then she stood up, sighed, and added, all right, let's start by making dinner. Rosa will be back soon, and then we'll figure out what to do next. For the next few days, Eva focused on finding a clinic that could help people with borderline mental conditions. After visiting a free facility, she realized it would be better to go into debt and place Howard in a paid center. Eventually, she found a reasonably good rehabilitation center, at least from the initial impression. She pawned her wedding ring and 2 chains, her only valuables. The money she got was enough to cover Howard's stay for 2 weeks. She still wasn't sure how she would pay after that, as the doctor she had spoken with said. To make sure the result of our treatment sticks and prevents future setbacks, we need at least a month. But since you don't have the full amount now, you can bring it later. Her main priority was to start treatment as quickly as possible. When Howard found out she had arranged for paid treatment, he vehemently refused to go. I don't have that kind of money, and I'm not going to live off of you. But Eva managed to convince him that it was something he needed to do. The key argument was, you'll come out normal, mentally stable, and we'll find you a job. There are plenty of opportunities for people like you. The most important thing is to want it. And then you can pay it back little by little. Howard agreed to the treatment. For the first week, Eva didn't see him, not because she didn't want to, but because that was the doctor's advice. In the beginning, patients need to completely detach from their usual lives. They will have proper care here, and professional psychologists will work with them. Don't visit just yet. Maybe in a week, or better yet, 10 days. I'll let you know when it's best to visit him. Eva didn't think anything was strange about the doctor's words at the time, so she patiently waited for the day she could visit him. When the time finally came, she spent the whole morning baking a raspberry pie, which Howard loved. She also chose her favorite dress, catching herself thinking that she really wanted to impress him. The first thing that surprised her was the nurse's statement when she met Eva at the door of the facility. Visits are allowed in the break room and only in the presence of an orderly. I'm sorry, but those are the rules. You see, not all patients are psychologically ready to re-enter the regular world, even in their minds. And to them, you're like a representative of that life. Eva, at that moment, thought that the rules seemed very much like those in a prison, but she accepted the requirements. Her main goal was to see Howard, to find out if he was feeling better. But when she saw him, her heart clenched painfully. Instead of the refreshed man she had imagined, with sparkling eyes, she saw a gaunt man with dark circles under his eyes. He answered her questions curtly, constantly glancing at the orderly standing nearby. He behaved as if he was being threatened or could be punished at any moment. At one point, Howard caught a brief moment and took her hand in his. Kissing it, he whispered faintly, "Please, help me." Eva felt him place something in her palm, and she discreetly moved her hand under the table. After sitting for another 5 minutes, she left the room and, as soon as she was sure no one was nearby, she unfolded the note. Reading it quickly, Eva was shocked. Howard wrote that it was slavery, that they weren't fed or treated, only forced to work, and he begged her to get him out of the facility. For several minutes, she stood there, bewildered, staring at the note. Eva immediately believed what was written, as it was clear from Howard's appearance that the so-called treatment had not helped him. The first thought that crossed her mind was to go straight to the head of the department and tell them that they had changed their mind about continuing the treatment. Upon hearing her, the doctor indignantly said, "Do you think this is all just a joke? You started it when you wanted, and now you want to stop it? We are responsible for each patient here. So, there's no way we're letting him go. By the way, you still owe for the 2 weeks. Do you remember that?" Eva understood. Howard wouldn't be let go that easily. Getting him into the clinic had been simple, but getting him out was almost impossible. Promising to bring the remaining payment the next day, Eva left. Almost immediately, she bumped into the orderly who had been present during her visit. He nodded toward the entrance door as if signaling that she should follow him. Once outside, he whispered, "I overheard your conversation. I can help get your disabled man out of here. But it will cost money." "How much?" Eva whispered in return. The orderly looked around as if afraid they were being overheard. "I'll be waiting for you today at 5 in the cafe on the corner of our street. We'll discuss everything there." Struggling to wait for the scheduled time, Eva arrived at the meeting. Without his white cap, she didn't recognize the orderly at first. He called her over himself. "Tomorrow, I'll arrange for him to be sent to work in the nearby building. When one of my colleagues takes him there, I'll distract him. Your job is to be nearby at that moment. It will be around 9 in the morning. You'll need to quickly push the wheelchair outside the facility. There won't be anyone at the checkpoint at that time. The pensioner guards are usually drinking tea." Eva, looking at him fearfully, asked, "But what's really going on there? What kind of work is that? This isn't a prison, they're supposed to be treating him here." But the young man interrupted her sharply. "If you want to save your man, then save him, and don't ask questions you don't need to know the answers to." "I might change my mind," he said, pulling a scrap of paper from his pocket and handing it to Eva. "This amount needs to be in my account before I start helping your disabled man. The account number is on the back of this note." After that, he stood up and left without even saying goodbye. Eva sat there, staring at the small piece of paper on which was written an amount nearly equal to her monthly salary. She didn't know where to get that kind of money, but she decided she would save Howard. Not fully understanding what could be happening in the paid rehabilitation department, she was terrified for his life. The first thought that came to her was to ask her boss for an advance, but then she dismissed the idea, knowing him for many years. Eva was almost sure he would refuse, as he didn't like such requests. Even if he agreed, the sum would be too little and wouldn't cover the orderly's demand. After placing the note in her purse, Eva left the cafe and almost immediately saw a bank across the street with an advertisement for a favorable loan offer. Despite not believing in luck, she decided to go in. An hour later, she came out with the needed sum. Eva didn't sleep all night. Her mind was a mess. At that moment, it seemed to her that everything in her life was sliding down a slope. Her husband's infidelity, the upcoming divorce, Howard's breakdowns and depression, and now the debt obligations, it all felt like a nightmare. She wanted to wake up and find herself back in her calm, peaceful life. But, unfortunately, this was her reality. Eva struggled to wait until morning. After calling in sick to work, she quickly got ready, sent her daughter to school, and then immediately headed to Howard. On the way, she transferred the entire sum to the orderly's account, not even thinking that he might deceive her. But he did everything exactly as he had described. Just a couple of hours later, Howard was sitting at Eva's kitchen table, eagerly scooping up soup with a spoon and saying, "You can't imagine how much I missed real food. They only fed us some kind of slop there, tasteless, with no smell, and barely sweetened tea. Even bread was only given at lunch, a tiny piece. But they made everyone work like dogs." He bit into a piece of pie, closed his eyes in pleasure, and sat there for a few minutes, chewing slowly. Then, after swallowing, he continued, "You won't believe it, but they have a whole production line running with patients. Even though I'm disabled, they brought me a sewing machine and made me sew day and night. For all the days I was there, I never even thought about alcohol. But I immediately remembered what you said." Eva looked at him questioningly, and he smiled, explaining, "Do you remember when you persuaded me to go there? You said that even in my situation, I'd still be able to find work later. I can now say with full confidence that I'm a real seamstress, or whatever they're called." She was shocked by his story because, from the outside, this paid department seemed no different from the others she had visited, except for its more affordable price. "By the way, how did you manage to get me out of there?" Howard asked. Eva decided not to mention the difficulties she had faced in rescuing him, including the loan. Instead, she tried to shift the conversation to another topic. For the next few days, their lives were calm. Eva worked, Rosa went to school, and Howard diligently studied job listings in hopes of finding work. Stephen hadn't visited his daughter once during all this time. He only reminded her of himself once, calling a few days before the divorce. "Well, in 2 days, I'll be waiting for you at the courthouse. And remember, I'll do everything I can to make sure our daughter stays with me," he said mockingly, and without listening to her response, he hung up the phone. That evening, noticing her mood, Howard asked what had happened. When he learned about the upcoming court date, he smiled and said, "Is that all? Let's make a plan of action. I didn't tell you, but I have 2 higher educations. One of them is in law, which really helps in business. We'll think through everything in detail. Although, it's pretty clear that a wonderful mother like you can only have her child taken away by force." Howard really managed to calm her down by breaking everything down for her regarding the court. She did everything he suggested, and the decision was made in her favor. Not only was her daughter left with her, but the father was also ordered to pay substantial child support. Eva returned from the courtroom in high spirits and rushed to Howard the moment she walked through the door. "You're amazing. Everything went exactly as you said, perfectly." Then, as if realizing what she'd said, she blushed and took a step back, embarrassed. "Sorry, I'm just overwhelmed with emotions. You should have seen my ex's face. You're just great." Then, Eva went on to describe how the session went. "You know, Howard, you really need to consider online consulting. You're such a great lawyer. You even outperformed the one my husband brought. You did all of that without even being in court." At first, the idea didn't seem very good to him. He tried to brush it off. I haven't done this in ages. Where would I even find clients? But a day later, after thinking it over carefully, he decided to go all in. He remembered that a few of his acquaintances had asked him for legal advice in the past. He called one of them and offered his services. The person was really happy. "It's great that you're back. I was just thinking about you recently, but I couldn't get through. You weren't picking up. I really need help with a court case against one of my bad clients." Howard agreed to help, especially since the acquaintance offered a decent sum. He won the case with no issues. All of his legal knowledge turned out to still be fresh. This court case became a great boost for him. Now, Howard happily took on new cases, enjoying the work. When he received his first payment, he handed it all to Eva. "Sorry, I noticed you forgot to hide the credit contract. I saw it, and the date is a day earlier than when you saved me from the clinic. Anyway, I understand now why you needed the money." Rolling his chair closer, he took her hand, "And thank you so much. I'll try to make up for it. But, if you don't mind, can I stay with you for a while?" Eva wanted to say something, but a lump caught in her throat, leaving her unable to speak. There was so much warmth and tenderness in Howard's voice that she just wanted to lean into him and never let go. He had changed so much since he started working. He practically glowed from within. And if he had once doubted that anything could change, that he could heal, now he was the one bringing up the possibility of surgery. When Eva came back from work, she noticed that Howard seemed deep in thought. When she asked what was going on, he replied, "I decided to check on what happened with my company today. After the bankruptcy, it was put up for auction, but there were no buyers at first. Now a person has come forward who is willing to take it for pennies. Through some of my friends, I found his contact and arranged a meeting for tomorrow." Eva looked at him, surprised, and Howard continued firmly, "You have to understand, I built that company piece by piece. It was the work of my life, and I really want to try to get it back. Or at least be useful in its recovery." "Why do you need this? You're doing great in legal work now. You could just focus on that," Eva asked. Howard paused for a second and then answered, "You see, it's my passion. It's a tribute to the proud legacy of my company. I want to bring it back to a worthy level. It doesn't matter that the owner will be someone else." The next day, Howard said the businessman, who was buying the company for his capricious son, agreed to his terms. "Why don't you come work with me?" Howard suddenly suggested. "I'd love to have you by my side, even at work." Eva was initially taken aback, but after thinking it over, she agreed. By then, she had already realized how much she liked Howard, though she couldn't bring herself to admit it. They both started their new jobs and dived headfirst into the restoration of the company. Before long, it was gaining momentum and doing even better than it had before the bankruptcy. Howard managed almost all the affairs of the company because Scott, the one to whom the firm was bought, didn't understand anything and didn't want to get involved. Whatever Scott tried to do always ended in some kind of problem. After the office reopening, former employees began to return and were very surprised by Howard's new status. They were not used to seeing their boss as one of them, but Howard tried his best to show that he was now just an ordinary colleague like the rest of them. One day, Scott didn't show up to the office at all. He had previously been coming and going, always asking Howard to cover for him. But this time, he didn't even call once. Howard tried calling his number, but it was turned off. Everything became clear only by evening when Scott's father, Thomas, arrived at the office. He explained that Scott had been in an accident and was in critical condition at the hospital. When Howard asked if any help was needed, Thomas sadly replied, "He needs blood, but for some unknown reason, mine and my wife's blood doesn't match." Upon hearing what type of blood was required, Howard immediately offered, "I can donate. Let's go right now, I have the right type." On the way, they started talking, and Thomas, Scott's father, sadly said, "Can you imagine? We just found out that Scott is not our biological child. When blood was needed for a transfusion, my wife and I donated and found out that we're completely unrelated to him. He paused for a moment, as if mentally processing the information, then added, "So, we've been raising and nurturing a completely foreign child for over 20 years. And where is our real child?" Howard tried to comfort him. "Well, don't worry. As they say, parents aren't necessarily those who gave birth, but those who raised you. You could hire a private investigator to uncover the truth. I have the number of a good detective." A few days later, Thomas came to the office with his wife. It was clear that they were very worried. He immediately asked to meet with Howard and insisted that Eva join them. As soon as they entered the office, Thomas stepped forward, glanced at Eva strangely, and began speaking. "Howard, thank you so much. Your friend really managed to find everything out quickly. Can you imagine, years ago, when my wife was giving birth, somehow the babies got swapped?" He turned to his wife, who was staring at Eva without blinking, and continued, "We were surprised when they told us we had a boy because all the doctors told her it was going to be a girl. And your friend somehow managed to dig up the incredible truth. It turns out, only 2 babies were born that day." At that moment, the man suddenly approached Eva, looked at her with tear-filled eyes, and quietly said, "We are your real parents." She looked between the woman crying in the corner and the composed man, and couldn't believe everything that was happening. Although, it could be true. As if to confirm everything that was said, Thomas named the hospital and the date of Scott's birth, and it matched the day of her own birth. Then they sat for a long time, embracing and, through their tears, telling each other how they had lived all these years. Now Eva had no doubts, for she looked so much like her mother. That same day, upon learning about their granddaughter, Thomas and his wife insisted on meeting Rosa, and they spent the entire evening with her. From then on, they would take her from school at every opportunity. Scott was recovering quickly. And while still in the hospital, Thomas declared, "I don't want to be involved with the company anymore. Howard is doing great with it, so he can run it. I don't enjoy it at all." Howard was appointed manager the very same day. He quickly brought the company to a whole new level. The parents didn't reject Scott, even after discovering he was not their biological son. And as he spoke with Eva, he began calling her sister. After being discharged from the hospital, Scott created a foundation for the homeless and opened a shelter for those in need. His endeavors in charity were going much better than his business, which his father had bought for him. It seemed like he had found his calling in philanthropy. People listened to him and respected him. Thanks to Thomas's connections, Howard was able to undergo the operation. 6 months later, he was able to stand on his own feet, albeit with the help of crutches. And on Rosa's birthday, when everyone had gathered at Eva's home, Howard handed her a small velvet box. "Eva, in the presence of the people closest to you, I ask you to become my wife. I love you so much." For a moment, there was silence before Rosa jumped into his arms. "Hooray! Howard will be my daddy." "Really? Can I call you Dad?" Eva tried to calm her daughter down. "Rosa, please don't act like this. I haven't said anything yet." At that moment, her daughter's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, you'll say yes, right? Howard is a good person." Smiling, Eva lifted her daughter into her arms and, looking at Howard, said, "Of course, I agree." In that moment, an unusual sense of lightness filled her heart. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly happy. A month later, they got married and moved into the country house that Howard had bought. Eva never saw Stephen again. He didn't visit Rosa. Jean, however, came once to see Rosa and, with a sad smile, said, "Ah, Stephen, my dear, he tried to build his happiness on someone else's misfortune, but in the end, he suffered. His latest lover found him, stripped him of every penny, and ran away." Eva realized she no longer cared at all about what happened to her ex-husband. There was no anger, no hatred, no pity left for that man. It felt as if he belonged to a completely different, unnecessary life, one that no longer had any place in her own. In her present, she had different concerns and joys. She told her former mother-in-law that she would always be welcome in their home. She also shared a little joy, as they were expecting a baby soon. If you enjoyed the story, please support it with a like and a comment. All the best to you.